Ever felt that, like that little tremor of nervous energy right before you go under, like you're all set to dive, but there's this part of you that's a little hesitant.
It's completely normal, that feeling.
It's like almost part of the ritual.
It really is. And actually, a lot of times we try to just push those feelings down. But the funny thing is getting to know those anxieties, like really understanding them, that's what can actually make you a more confident diver in the long run.
Makes sense. So it's not about being fearless, but about making friends with those nerves, yeah?
Exactly.
All right, so let's shine a light on those fear monsters, as we're calling them. What are some of the big anxieties folks have when it comes to being underwater?
Oh, we see a huge range. Fear of the unknown, that's a big one. Claustrophobia, that's another common one. And then there are the worries about equipment, like what happens if something goes wrong down there? And of course, running into marine life, especially the ones with teeth, that can get people's heart rates up.
Right. I mean, we're land mammals at the end of the day, heading into this whole different world. Makes sense.
Okay.
But on a deeper level, what's actually happening in our brains, in our bodies, when those anxieties kick in?
Basically, our nervous system, it goes into this ancient fight or flight mode. Heart rate spikes, breathing gets faster, muscles tense up all, getting ready for a threat.
It's like our inner caveman flip it out a bit, huh?
It is. It totally is. Only problem is, underwater, fight isn't really an option most of the time. And flight, well, with all that gear on, it gets a bit tricky. So, yeah, knowing about this whole physiological response, that's a big deal. Because then in the water, when those feelings bubble up, you can go, aha, that's just my body doing its thing, not necessarily a red alert that something's actually wrong.
So knowledge really is power.
For sure.
And speaking of power, I'm a huge believer in preparation. I mean, you wouldn't just jump out of a plane without a parachute, right?
Exactly. You've got to be prepared, both physically and mentally. That's where, a good scuba diving course, free diving course, snorkeling, whatever it is you're into, that's invaluable.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about the skills. It's about that confidence, that familiarity with all the equipment. Plus, knowing the environment you'll be diving in, what creatures you might bump into, all that shrinks down those fear monsters,
Right, like having a map instead of stumbling around in the dark. But what about, those what-if scenarios? Those can really get to you, even when you've prepped.
Absolutely, and that's where the magic of visualization comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
So you vividly picture yourself having a successful dive, going down, exploring, coming back up. You're essentially giving your nervous system a sneak preview.
It's like mental rehearsal, getting ready for that underwater debut.
Exactly. Think of it this way. When you visualize, you're pre-programming your brain to be less scared because it feels familiar. It's like less of a shock to the system.
I like that.
And when you do get in the water, your brain's like, hey, I've seen this movie before. I know how this ends.
It's like your brain's already one step ahead of you.
Exactly.
So we've done our mental rehearsal, we're geared up, and boom, we hit the water. But then that familiar wave of anxiety washes over us. What do? It's like our brains took the visualization class, but our bodies skipped it.
That's why it's essential to have an underwater toolkit, those go-to techniques for those fantastic moments. And it all starts with the foundation of good buoyancy control.
Okay, buoyancy control, keeping steady in the water. But how does that tie into managing anxiety?
When your breathing is steady, your buoyancy is stable. You're not fighting to stay at the right depth, which can often trigger those anxious feelings. It's like a feedback loop. Calm breathing, calm body, calm mind.
So deep, steady breaths are key. But what if you need more than just breathing to regain that sense of calm?
That's where the stop, breathe, think, act method comes in. It's incredibly effective for managing anxiety, both on land and underwater. Imagine this. You're exploring a reef, and suddenly you realize you're a bit disoriented. You've drifted from your buddy, and that initial jolt of panic hits.
Okay, yeah, I could see how that would be unnerving.
This is where you hit pause, literally. You stop moving, breathe deeply and slowly, allowing your heart rate to settle. Then you think about the situation. Where's your buddy? What are your surroundings? This allows you to make a clear-headed assessment. And finally, you act based on that assessment, signal your buddy, use your compass, or simply retrace your fin ticks.
It's amazing how just taking a moment to pause can completely shift your perspective.
Oh.
Have you had any experiences where this method really came in handy during a dive?
Absolutely. I remember one dive, I was descending a steep wall, and my air gauge started malfunctioning. I felt that surge of anxiety building. Am I running low on air? What if I have to surface early? But instead of letting those thoughts spiral, I stopped, took those deep breaths, and assessed the situation. I signaled to my buddy, we checked each other's gauges, and realized I had plenty of air left. The malfunctioning gauge was simply a technical glitch, not an emergency.
Wow, that's a perfect example of how this method can prevent a minor hiccup from turning into a full-blown panic attack. It's like having a mental reset button. So we've talked about the pre-dive prep, the in-the-moment techniques. What about after the dive? After a dive, we're usually so busy, like swapping stories and soaking up that post-dive high-five feeling.
Yeah,
But I feel like we rarely actually talk about the mental game.
you're right.
So how important is it to really reflect on those experiences, especially when we're trying to, really get a handle on anxiety?
It's super important. It's like a mental debrief. Chatting it over with your buddy, what went smoothly, any moments where that anxiety crept in and how you dealt with it, it really helps solidify those good vibes and pinpoint those areas where you can keep building that confidence.
So it's not just about logging the dive itself, but logging that mental journey too.
Totally. And there's some really cool brain science behind this too. Every time you face a fear and you handle it, you're strengthening certain pathways in your brain.
Really?
Yeah. You're basically rewiring yourself for greater resilience, dive by dive.
So our brains are learning even when we're back on dry land, huh?
Exactly.
I love that. But let's be real. Sometimes those anxieties they stick around.
Yeah.
What if you're doing all the prep, the visualization, the breathing, all of it, but it still feels overwhelming?
Well, first off, remember that asking for help, that's a sign of strength, not weakness.
That's so true.
Just like, you wouldn't think twice about getting your gear checked by a pro. It's the same thing with your mental game. There's zero shame in reaching out to a mental health professional, especially one who gets anxiety, phobias, those underwater anxieties.
Right. So it's like having a dive buddy, but for your mind, someone to help you navigate those deeper waters. So what are some things someone could try if they want to, get that professional support?
There's a bunch of options. Some people, they find that working one-on-one with a dive instructor who really knows anxiety, that can be huge. And then there are more, I guess you'd call them specialized therapies, like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, they call it, or even hypnotherapy.
Wow.
Yeah, those can be super powerful for rewiring those negative thought patterns and building those coping mechanisms.
So many tools in the anxiety busting toolkit. It's pretty amazing. As we're wrapping up this deep dive into conquering underwater anxiety, I'm struck by the fact that, overcoming these fears, it's kind of like learning to dive itself.
Ooh, I like that. How so?
Well, think about it. At first, it's a little intimidating, right? All this new gear, new things to learn.
For sure.
A whole new world down there. But with practice, patience, a good guide by your side, you start to feel more at ease, more sure of yourself.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, this incredible world opens up beneath the surface, like you've discovered a whole new dimension.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Really, don't let anxiety hold you back from all that wonder, all that beauty down there.
Absolutely. To all our listeners out there who are feeling those pre-dive jitters, remember this. You're not alone. Anxiety, it's just part of the experience. So embrace the challenge, use those tools we've talked about, and never be afraid to ask for help if you need it. That underwater world is calling, and we'll see you down there.